Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am one of your hosts, Stephen Falgout.
And I am your other host, Louis Falgout. Now, Get Recc'd is a sort of sometimes bi-weekly podcast where Stephen and I, two brothers, recommend pieces of media to each other at the end of each episode, and then in the next episode, we then discuss the media that we recommended to each other.
And what a little episode we have for everyone today. We are this week talking about, we have another themed episode. So because it's new year, new me, we're doing another What Happened. Viewers of the podcast might remember our last What Happened, where we covered some stuff, including Eminem, who clapped back on us really quick after we did that. Again, I will remind everyone, he only released his follow-up album because of our podcast, so you're welcome.
For sure, yeah. So if you enjoyed Kamikaze, if you're one of the 5 people who liked it, there you go. It's because of us.
So today we're going to be talking about Pirates of the Caribbean. Caribbean? Who cares? Who Caribbeans, am I right?
Yeah.
well, Disney will, because
Oh dear, Steven has cut off. Is this a thing? Steven, we can't hear you. This is bad. We might have some technical difficulties, folks. Oh dear. Okay, this is going to be an issue. Well, I'm going to go ahead and go to a technical difficulties screen as we sort this out, everybody. We're stream fucked up in the first 2 minutes, so going strong. Technical difficulties will be muted. When we are back, you'll hear us and the screen will have shown up. Okay. All right. Okay, everybody. Well, that was weird. Anyway, welcome back,
So
Steven.
what I was saying for all those people out there before I dropped was that they can look forward to a new Pirates movie where they're actually going to discuss what we talk about today. It's going to be pretty interesting. It's going to be like Eminem's Clapback album. They're going to make a movie just specifically centered around what we talk about today on Get Recc'd.
Pirates of the Caribbean, fuck Get Recc'd podcast. Get fucked, Get Recc'd.
Yeah,
Damn,
and it's gonna start. I'm giving away some secrets. They talked to us beforehand. I'm gonna divulge that now because they had to use our likeness. But it's gonna start with Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow, listening to Get Recc'd. Really groundbreaking stuff, actually, because at the time they didn't even have the internet. So how they're gonna work that in, I'm really curious to see.
Yeah.
But I think it'll be good.
I agree. It's definitely going to be good.
Arcade Fire, on the other hand, is not going to care. Funnily enough, actually.
Yeah, probably not. And it's a good thing you bring up Arcade Fire because we're actually going to be transitioning right now into talking about Arcade Fire. Whoa, we're such a great podcast. Transitions. So last episode, I recommended
This is how you podcast, everyone.
Oh, yeah,
If
take
anyone
notes.
out there,
Take notes.
If anyone out there is trying to podcast, first of all, make sure you have technical difficulties.
Oh, yeah.
Make sure you announce
A minute
your
in.
transition. Yeah, a minute in. You've got to be clear about that.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you transition, make sure you announce it. People need to know that you're transitioning.
Yeah, very important. And that's what we have just done. And so I recommended to Steven the band Arcade Fire for this theme because Arcade Fire went from being what I would say a fantastic band to a terrible one. So we'll talk about that today, and we're gonna start off the first.
Wait, actually, just really quick. I don't know if we finished the thought. I'll jump in really quick here. So the idea of the theme was that we were recommending to each other either something we thought started bad and became great, or something that we thought started great and became bad. I don't know if I'll say bad, but bad. Definitely less quality.
And that is what happened for both of the recommendations that we have this week for you here. So anyway, I recommended Funeral and The Suburbs as two albums of when Arcade Fire was great, and then the 2017 album Everything Now as the one where they are terrible. And but we're going to go ahead and quickly start with Funeral, then we'll jump to The Suburbs. I have them both on the screen because I kind of put them in the same category, but we'll talk specifically about Funeral first, and I will let Steven begin with that.
So, Lewis, I would ask you, how many albums in is this for them?
It's the debut.
The debut. Okay. So I think what's really interesting about this album is that you get a lot of sounds that I think have become more mainstream now, but I would reckon to bet that at the time this was a very influential indie album.
Yes, absolutely.
Their use of a lot of different instruments, their indie rock aesthetic, all really great stuff coming out of this album. Since we're going to talk about both of these together, I think I enjoy this one more than The Suburbs.
Yep, me too.
But not by necessarily too much. So I think for me, what I like most about this album, I really like the
oh dear.
story that's being told.
Oh, he's good. Steven, you cut off for a moment there. Can you say something?
Hello.
Okay. Sorry. It was maybe it's a weird connection thing. Anyway, can you repeat the sentence you were saying that you really like, the thing you really like about the album?
Yeah, Discord might be having a little bit of trouble today, everyone.
Hopefully
so sorry about that.
Yeah, hopefully that calms down soon.
I was saying I really like the pacing, I think first and foremost.
Oh yeah.
I like they're telling a little story here across all the tracks. I think the more famous tracks, probably like Rebellion,
Wake
or
Up.
just Wake Up, or just really great indie rock songs that stand on their own. But I think what's really great about these tracks in particular is that they stand on their own, but in the progression of the album are only made better.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree.
I feel like that doesn't always happen necessarily. Okay, Discord is really bugging out.
Well, the good news is I still hear you just fine.
Okay, that's good.
Well, I mean, yeah, and you're absolutely right that this was massively influential for indie rock music, but I think the thing that's important to note too is that this album isn't your standard kind of, jangly, reverbial indie rock. You think of like, I don't know, like Interpol or something. Which I guess maybe not indie rock, but you know what I mean, the kind of a twangy guitar sound that you expect from like a generic indie rock band. Arcade Fire have this really massive chamber pop influence. They're bringing in tons of orchestral instruments to the point where you could almost call this like chamber rock, and it's got just strings and mainly strings, that and like pianos, and it's just so it's so orchestral, and I think that's something that you could say was influential, but how many indie rock bands really sound exactly like this? A band that can mix this straightforward indie rock aesthetic with chamber pop this well. I'd say it's still fairly unique to Arcade Fire. Just not to say that other bands don't work with the same kind of instrumental palette, but I don't know that I've heard anything that was done, at the very least, this strongly since.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that for a breakout album, just incredible.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is one of the best debuts of all time. I would absolutely say that. Now, they did have a debut EP before this, but it wasn't like commercial or anything, right? Like, this is their major label debut record, and it is just a monster of an album. I mean, it's not Sprite, it's water. Zealand, thank you.
Yeah, we stay hydrated here.
Yeah, stay hydrated. Very important, kids. But yeah, you mentioned the pacing of this album. It is absolutely superb on this record. The neighborhood, I don't know if you'd call it a sweep, but the 4 neighborhood songs here, just the first half of this record flows so incredibly well. I mean, it does throughout the entire thing. And it's like, oh God, there's just so many incredible songs on this thing. I mean, Neighborhood number 1, like, God, I think this album is, I guess, similar in a way to when we talked about In the Airplane Over the Sea, in the sense that it has this extremely potent emotional resonance that I'm sure, I don't know if it affected you in the way that it affects me, and I feel like it affected a lot of people, but it's just so strongly personal and emotional. And I mean, some of the history behind this album is a lot of the band members' family members kept dying. That's why they called it Funeral. And you get just this entire album is mostly just sad. And even when it's got some, I guess you could say, happiness, like on Rebellion, it's still a very sad message, you know, rebelling against sleep so that you can maintain your childhood, and all of these themes of lost childhood and growing up and moving away and moving on that I think make this thing just so emotionally powerful.
Yeah, and I think the instrumentals that they utilize really highlight that and accentuate that too.
Oh,
I also, on this one, I also want to talk about the final track, because I really like the way that this track ends too. In the Backseat is a slow song. I think it's like 6 minutes or over 6 minutes. And usually I'm not really a fan of that, especially as the final track of an album. But man, something about it, the way that it builds and you have this culmination of all of that orchestral mix, it just feels like such a somber way to end this thing, which is, as you already talked about, kind of depressing, honestly, throughout.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the song's about her mother dying. She's learning to cope with the death of her mother. The metaphor is brilliant. I don't know if this is something you caught on, but the metaphor in the song, you know, she contrasts the fear of driving with the fear of taking control of her life after her mother died. You know, she likes the comfort of being in the backseat, allowing other people to do things for her. Now that her mother is dead, she has to learn how to drive, which she's been learning to do her whole life. Amazing lyrics. Across this entire record, but this song especially. And no, you're absolutely right. This song is a powerful closer, and it's just show-stopping, you know? Like, Regine, her voice is amazing. I love her every time she appears. Well, I love her every time she appears in these first 3 records. And yeah, closing off this album with this song, man. But I also would love to call to, you know, other songs in here. I don't just want to end up talking about that one. Like Paris, I agree that Wake Up is the best song. I don't know if you agree, Stephen. But Wake Up is a super influential song, and perhaps its influence hasn't been amazing. You know, that sort of what I've heard described as like the millennial woe chorus, you know, where you do the big woes. But in this, like, you can see why it caught on, because in this song, it has so much power. It's so emotional, and it's just like this release of all of the emotions on this record and on this song especially, and it's just incredible. It's got one of the most amazingly huge sounds of any indie rock album I've like ever heard, possibly. It's just incredible. And you know, other songs that are amazing. I mean, Neighbor. I mean, I could just literally name every single song here because they're all amazing. This record is so good. I don't know if you want to call out some other specific songs, so I don't take the wheel, so to speak.
I mean, Rebellion Lies. is probably my favorite song from this
Oh
one.
yeah, amazing song.
Um,
Yeah, I mean,
but yeah, I mean, we could talk about this one for a while, but I don't know. Just for our own pacing, is there anything that you like? Any final thoughts you want to talk about on this one specifically before we move over to the suburbs?
on this record, not particularly. We do need to speed things up. I do. Should we wait until the very end of the segment to give our thoughts and scores on the albums individually? You think?
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay, then yeah, let's go ahead and move to the suburbs. I feel like we've talked enough about Funeral here. What did you notice about the suburbs? I selected the suburbs for a very specific reason because I think that the suburbs does actually demonstrate a change of sound, and a pretty big one for the band that perhaps can add a little bit of insight into how the band evolved and changed. And I'm wondering, first and foremost, before you get into like how you enjoyed the album, if you noticed that change, and what do you think that change was?
I would say I think so. So where are you okay?
What, am I okay? Is there a problem?
I would say I think so. The Okay, so their first album, the first one that we just talked about, Funeral, felt very orchestral to me. This starts to feel a little more electronic. Is that the way I would put it? Maybe that's the way I would put it.
You could for
felt
certain
like more
tracks.
loops.
Yeah.
Not necessarily as sweeping as the first one.
Yeah, so that's the core difference that I wanted to point out. And it sounds like you kind of noticed it. This album has a very heavy Bruce Springsteen influence. I don't know if you noticed the Springsteen influence. Maybe now that I say it, you might. When compared to Funeral, which again is like, it's like you could call it chamber rock. This album is much more straightforward instrumentally. It's very straightforward rock. Straightforward indie rock, I should say. This sounds more like what, I don't want to say generic, but what you would typically associate with the genre of indie rock, right? More than Funeral does.
Yeah.
So you've got a more basic band setup for most of these tracks, but you are right that some tracks introduce more electronic elements, most importantly Sprawl 2, which is practically a dance song, and of course that's where you really notice the connection between this album and like what we're going to talk about next. But anyway, now that I got that out of the way, you can go ahead and discuss your opinions of the record.
Yeah, I think I already said it, but I didn't enjoy this one as much as Funeral. I do like this album a lot, though. I think, again, they have a lot of really great tracks on this one. The track list was longer, I noticed. But again, they have a really nice progression from track to track. I really like how this track opens with the suburbs and then kind of ends with a short stint of the suburbs. I thought that was a fun little kind of wrap of the album. Rococo, City with No Children, Month of May are all really great off of this one. And We Used to Wait, I think probably is my favorite track on this one. Now that you call the Springsteen influence, I can definitely see that on a couple of these.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally,
Go ahead.
Generally, I didn't feel as moved by this album as I did with The Funeral. But for the most part, I enjoyed most, if not all, of the tracks still on this one.
Yeah, so one thing that we should note is that the Suburbs is a concept album, something you may or may not have picked up on, that is about the suburbs. And I guess in that way, it very much shares themes with Funeral and the themes of moving on, having to move past the sort of mundanity of suburban life. There's callbacks to the actual historical ramifications of the suburbs, such as the time periods in which you started to see this the urban sprawl, which of course is referenced in the Sprawl songs. And I think the point that the band tries to make on this record, at least is what I can gather it, is that the suburbs have essentially distracted us from what I suppose Butler and maybe Shashan's, probably just Butler, view as the beauties of life. You know, there's lyrics on, I think it's We Used to Wait, where he talks about no, that's Deep Blue. Put the laptop down for a while, put the cell phone down for a while. In the night, there's something wild. So there's this very condemnation of the suburbs, but it's not mean or mean-spirited towards it either. Like, there's this very clear love of it because this is how they grew up, but they're just looking back at it and seeing it as perhaps a massive problem. And I actually do think that this album emotionally resonates with me to a similar degree to Funeral, not as much, but for that reason, I think the themes explored here are really interesting, and the ways in which they do it are just deeply sad. There's a very sad undercurrent throughout this record, just as there was in the other one, and
I think sad is a good thing to highlight as we, I don't think we'll move on there quite yet, but as we move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Because these both are quite generally depressing.
For sure.
But I think in a way that doesn't make you feel those emotions, but makes you understand and moves you.
Yeah. Well, it certainly makes me feel those emotions.
Well, we've listened to a couple here on Get Recc'd that definitely are sad and make me feel sad.
Yeah,
like sure. The one about the wars.
Yeah,
that one was really rough.
Of course. Yep. I like sad music. You're come to learn this.
Yeah, that's right. The more depressing, the better.
Generally.
But yeah, I think that you definitely feel that on this album. Although I do feel like some of these tracks are more uplifting than some of the tracks off of Funeral.
Yeah, it has probably more emotional pacing, going from breezier, happier moments to the really sad ones and the nostalgic ones. You know, again, I think this album is paced remarkably well. It is a long album; it's over an hour.
Yeah, very long.
And I can admit that you definitely start to feel that. I don't mind. Some people tend to use that as a negative, and I guess I kind of understand. But I don't think people accuse this album of having filler songs and stuff, which I don't think that's true at all. Everything here feels essential to the record and the narrative that's being told. I mean, I guess you could say the little Suburbs reprise at the end is kind of unnecessary, but I don't know. It does add some. It adds something, right? Yeah, if I want to call it my favorite tracks, yeah, The Suburbs, Modern Man, Suburban War, Month of May, Sprawl 1 and Sprawl 2 are incredible. Half-Light 1, Empty Room. I mean, there's a ton of highlights on this thing. This album's great. And one last thing I do want to mention, because it seems like we're wrapping it up here, is this album was probably the most surprise Grammy win of the decade, possibly. Maybe not ever, but for a long time. The Grammys are a giant joke, and I hate them so much. But they gave Album of the Year in 2010 to Arcade Fire with this record, which was a huge upset. Because, I mean, you know, prior to this album, no doubt about it, this band had a fan base. But you wouldn't really call them mainstream to the level of, like, Grammy recognition. But they got it with this album, and, you know, I applaud them for that, I guess. I don't really know how much of an accomplishment that is, but it's an accomplishment for an indie band to do it, and I think that's interesting.
Who were their competition?
I'm not sure, but...
Here, let me see.
You could look it up real quick if you'd like to.
Yeah.
Grammy Album of the Year 2010.
Arcade Fire performed both Month of May and Ready to Start.
Yeah.
At the Grammys.
Oh, Ready to Start also. I didn't call out that, so that's a great fucking song.
Album of the Year was The Suburbs. The others in the category... Oh, geez. Okay.
Well, it's the Grammys. That's the reaction you should have.
Recovery by Eminem.
Oh, no.
Need You Now by Lady Antebellum. The Fame Monster by Lady Gaga.
Oh, no.
And Teenage Dream by Katy Perry.
Oh, dear. Yeah, but it's the Grammys. They probably would have given that shit to Katy Perry or something. It's still surprising nonetheless. You know, Arcade Fire upset Katy Perry in 2010 for the Grammys, which is pretty nuts.
The year that Best Pop Performance was won by Train for Hey Soul Sister. So.
Oh, yeah, that provides some context. So anyway, perhaps it was that mainstream recognition that led to the band deciding to do something very different. And we will now move into 2017's terrible Everything Now. But Steven,
so just to be clear though, there was an album between The Suburbs and this.
Reflector.
There not?
Reflector. Yes, there was.
Reflector.
2013.
Which I remember I enjoying that quite a bit as well.
That album, I'll briefly, yeah. So that album's okay. I feel like that album's a real mixed bag. It was kind of just like a clusterfuck of ideas and a lot of dance ideas that mostly, well, not mostly, but a few of which did not go over well. However, the title track on that album is great. It's like a genuinely great like disco rock song. And 2013 was that weird year where disco came back for a short period of time, and Arcade Fire jumped on that for whatever reason. And yeah, so that album's okay, but it is I guess it's good you brought it up, because it definitely is another transitional point between the Suburbs to this album, which we should begin to talk about. So what did you think of Everything Now, and how do you think it relates to the band's evolution, or I guess you could say devolution?
Okay, what is this? It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's like this weird disco dance rock album, and I will say, coming off of the Suburbs, jumping immediately into this is a very stark relief. It's like I don't even quite get. So first of all, the track listing confused the hell out of me, because there's Everything Now continued as the first track, Before Everything Now, and Before Everything Now continued.
Yeah, it's like, because the band tried to do this infinitely repeating thing with this album, where if you play it, and of course you listen on Spotify, so you probably didn't hear this, but you play it on CD, the album transitions back into itself. Which is really weird, because most of the songs don't do that. It's just like at the end and the beginning they decided to do it. I don't fucking know. But yeah, you're right. It's weird.
So yeah, there are really no tracks on this thing that I enjoyed.
Okay, that's interesting.
The only one, the title track, is okay. But besides that, I really don't. I just don't understand where this came from. And I will give them credit for trying something different. You know, like, I'm not going to say that they need to stick to their sound.
Yeah, and the Suburbs was a change, and it was good.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
So.
But this is just such a stark change in a way that it feels like a marketing executive came to them and said, "Hey, we need a big one." And they were like, "Okay."
Yeah, and it's weird too, right? Because like the album's themes you might not have picked up on. There's so many themes like anti-commercialism and shit. And like I could give them
like
the most
infinite content.
Yeah, and I could give them the most generous. Oh yeah, you didn't get the physical copy. I have the CD, and the packaging is like a parody of like magazine ads and stuff. I'm holding it here. It's bizarre. And I could give them the fairest of interpretations and say that they were doing an intentional contrast, right? Making really commercial sounding songs, but having the sort of anti-commercialism message. But I'm sorry, guys, it didn't work. Okay, so let me be fair to the album, actually, because I actually like 3 songs. You might be surprised. Everything Now, the title track, is a pretty good rip-off of an ABBA song, right? It's like they're just trying to make an ABBA song, right? Like, you got that too, didn't you?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And it's a little janky, but okay. I think it's nice. I think it's got a nice piano melody. I like Put Your Money on Me. I think that song's pretty good. And We Don't Deserve Love is actually I think is a great song. I actually think that this song calls back to the emotional resonance of earlier Arcade Fire and does a pretty good job of tying up the themes on this record. I think the problem is that between these bookends of the record, everything just sucks so much. I still cannot believe a band that made the song Neighborhood Number 1 made the song Peter Pan. That is unbelievable to me, because Peter Pan is like one of the worst songs I've like ever heard from a band of this stature. It is so bad. And then Regine singing on Electric Blue is just the grossest and ugliest sounding thing. It's so bad. Creature Comfort is really bizarre, and it's just like really poorly done. It's like this attempt to write a song about suicidal people, but it just feels like it's in horrifically poor taste. God, Chemistry has just this awful fucking chorus. The Infinite Content songs, right? Like, holy shit, what is that garbage? I mean...
Yeah, those are the ones that really got me.
Oh, boy, yeah. Peter Pan didn't stick out to you? Because holy shit. Like, that's the worst song to me. The mixing on that thing. Like, what even is that? What even were they doing with that song? The mix on that song is horrific. It's so bad. And yeah, but infinite content obviously is what sticks out. Good goddamn is just fucking annoying. Like the lyrical refrain of just tell me there's a good goddamn, just over and over, and it's like, oh, this isn't even clever. Surely, it seems like you mostly agree, right?
Yeah, and I just go back to the question of where did this come from? It just
Yeah.
seems so strange. It's such a odd direction. And again, I give them credit for going in this direction, at least trying, but I just don't think that it succeeded.
Oh, not at all.
I really don't. And the thing is, if you're gonna make, I just don't even know if you can. If it would be hard for me to see a band of this stature, watch them make a disco album and say, yeah, they did good. Like, I don't ever see myself doing that.
Well, so you have to keep in mind.
You mentioned the disco revival. I don't know if I'd say disco. It's more like funk revival.
No, it was definitely disco. Oh, it's definitely disco. Bruno
like
Mars had a
funk.
straight up disco song. Daft Punk had a straight up disco song. Arcade Fire had a straight up disco song. I mean, yeah, then funk came back too. But I mean, like for like about a couple months, there were like 3 disco songs on the air. Well, it was just I guess if you really want to make it more generalized, you could say it was like this weird 70s pop comeback, I guess, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
but I just recall the disco songs. But you have to remember, Arcade Fire on Reflector, the title track to that album was a straight up disco song. Or disco rock, I guess. So this didn't come out of nowhere. It's more that Reflector as an album felt like they were feeling around with making dance music, and those tended to be the weaker moments on the record, for the most part. I think Reflector's a great song, but and that's kind of what that album felt like. And then this album is like, even though a lot of people told Arcade Fire and said about Reflector they didn't really like the dance music stuff they were trying to do, Arcade Fire was like, fuck you guys, we are gonna go even further in that direction. Just make a straight up dance album with ABBA copycat songs and weird, like, what do you even call Peter Pan? It's just like, so I can see where it came from. I just question how in the fuck they were making this. A band that released an album as groundbreaking as and incredible as Funeral. A band that released an album as as much of a mainstream shakeup as the Suburbs. How could they make these songs and think, yeah, this is good? You know, having not been around for like 4 years, I really think people are going to enjoy it when we come back with this record. Like, how does that happen? And who was the producer in the studio who was nodding along to this? It's like, and the worst part about it is that I'm pretty convinced Arcade Fire is going to do one of 2 things. They're either, I know the kind of person Win Butler is. He might dig his heels in the dirt and stay in this field and make more music this shitty and bad. Or what they might choose to do is please everybody by attempting to recreate early Arcade Fire. And this isn't my idea. I saw somebody mentioning this somewhere, but I kind of agree this might happen. Trying to recreate early Arcade Fire and just failing to recapture it. Like, to me, and I don't like to admit that because I love this band, but to me that seems like those are the 2 alternatives that may end up happening with the next Arcade Fire album.
I want to mention something real quick because we mentioned on the last 2 how incredible the pacing was. This one, that is all out the window.
Oh yeah.
This thing is not paced well at all. Even within tracks, I would suggest that, like, inside tracks themselves, the pacing is just a mess.
Yeah,
but
the songwriting's
especially
pretty bad.
track to track, it can be kind of unbearable at times.
Yeah.
I do
think-
want to mention, though, I'm looking at the Wikipedia page, and they said that they did some satirical marketing on the lead up to this album, which is always hit or miss for me, but I did find this one funny. Apparently, they reviewed a fake installment of rock band called Arcade Fire Rock Band.
I didn't know about that. Yeah, like, they had a artistic vision in terms of the kind of message they wanted to portray with this album. I just have to question why they decided to do it in this way. And you mentioned the pacing, and one thing I really want to call out is what a weird pace breaker is the 2 versions of Infinite Content, right? Like, what a weird, just, like, it just comes out of nowhere and splits the album. Like, you just hear this horrendously underdeveloped song 2 times. Except one time it's, like, this terrible punk song, and the other time it's, like, this terrible country song. Like, what even... I don't know, man. This album depresses me. You know...
Yeah, it feels manufactured. And
Yeah.
I think that's what I was getting at earlier when I talked about the marketing executive. It feels manufactured in a way that surprises me that it could even come from this band.
Yeah.
But
anyway, we should sum this up. So, Steven, go ahead and give sort of brief final thoughts on all 3 albums, and then as well as your explanation of what you think happened to Arcade Fire.
okay, so I would give the Funeral album, the album known as Funeral,
Yes, Funeral.
a 9. Probably closer to a 9.5. That's a new year, everyone out there in Get Recc'd land. I'm giving less things a 10. So I'm giving this a 9.5.
Okay.
The Suburbs, I would give a 9. I really enjoyed the Suburbs. I want to get that across. I just did not enjoy it as much as I enjoyed Funeral, but both of these albums are incredible. Everything Now, I don't want to be as harsh as I've been on some things that I really have listened to on this program and have generally hated. But I think ultimately I give this thing, and I think I'm being nice here, I'm giving it a 4.
Okay.
I do like Everything Now off this album. Enough to where I guess I give it a 4.
Yeah, great.
So what do I think happened? I think you almost hit the nail on the head, honestly. I don't want to say they became too big time, because that's like the most indie thing that I think anyone could ever say.
Yeah.
But in a way, I do think they did. I think that, I think that it's hard to continue to capture something that you are known for so long. Right? I give all credit to the Beatles, because somehow they were able to do that forever.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have a band like this who becomes so influential over so many years across multiple albums, and then you take a hiatus as long as they took a hiatus, it's not hard to imagine that they come out with something that either, as you mentioned, tries to recapture their old sound, which might be where they go next, or something that's completely different. And like I said, I credit them for trying something different. I just don't think that it worked, ultimately.
Yeah. And as for me, I give Funeral a 10. It's one of my all-time favorite albums. I think the album is a goddamn incredible masterpiece. One of the best albums that indie rock has to offer. Of course, the genre tag is very vague. It's other things. Just one of the best albums of the 2000s all around. One of the best albums of all time. The album is it's amazing. It's absolutely brilliant. And I did an Essentials review of it on the Music Breakdown channel if anybody wants to check that out. That was a good one. The Suburbs I give a 9. Again, another album that I think is really incredible. One of the few Grammy album of the years that was ever deserved. Not to say I'm certain it was the best album of that year, but no doubt a contender. And especially compared to what the Grammys normally nominate, like fucking Taylor Swift 1989 and shit, and Adele 25, you know. So that's another just amazing record. I love that record to death.
Yeah, if you were to think about Grammy winners, like something of this magnitude, I might say, remember that time Beck won Album of the Year? Like, that was kind of out there for the Grammys, too.
Yeah, but wasn't that, like, one of Beck's, like, just least, like, everybody didn't even like that album? Wasn't that, like, that was this decade, wasn't it? And, like, it was a Beck album that no one even liked, but
Yeah, and everyone said it was just because the Grammys were trying to be more hip, so...
Yeah, but with the Arcade Fire one, they actually had their finger on the pulse, I feel like, you know? It's actually a really brilliant record that deserves a recognition. And then, finally, Everything Now, I would give a 3. I'll be generous and say 3.5, I suppose. You know, it's just while there are 3 songs that I like, and the 3 songs do happen to be the openers and the opener and closers, which is a good thing. That definitely benefits the album. If the best songs were in the middle, but it opened and closed really terribly, I might feel even worse about it. But God, the rest of this album is so shitty. And the best songs aren't like amazing. They're not even close to being among the band's best. They don't touch really anything from, Funeral, Neon Bible, or the Suburbs, and not even some stuff on Reflector. And of course, Neon Bible, Stephen, you didn't listen to here, but that was the album. That was the second album. And I guess, what happened, I already described what happened, and Steven summed up my thoughts on that pretty well. I guess the last thing that I want to say here, something that I'm sure many of you picked up on, is that Steven happens to believe that Everything Now is a better album than Filth by Swans and No Love Deep Web. So add that one to the list, everyone.
That is true.
Okay, and I think we're going to move on to what you recommended to me, Steven. So why don't you go ahead and explain what you recommended to me?
I actually just wanted to quickly say all of that was a lie. I actually liked Everything Now better than Funeral.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So cool. I just wanted to get that out there real quick.
What happened? They turned from a shitty, awful band into one of the best of the century. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
All right, so Lewis, I recommended to you the first of the Pirates of the Caribbean.
It sounds better when you say Caribbean. Only in this context.
All right,
and no others.
Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah, sure.
1, The Curse of the Black Pearl, and then 3, At World's End.
Mm-hmm. And why? How does this fit the theme?
Okay, I want to get something off my chest.
Sure.
I'm not a huge fan of the Pirates of the Caribbean series. I think that only the first one is good, but I don't even really like it that much, to be honest.
Okay.
But I can tell you, hands down, it gets a lot worse from here.
Yeah.
And I would argue that At World's End, I'm going to be clear. I wanted to stick to the original trilogy, if you can call it that. At World's End is by far, hands down, the worst of the original trilogy. I don't actually think it's the worst one. On Stranger's Tides is pretty miserable. But definitely within this original trilogy, 1 is, and I think 1 generally is just the best of any of these. And then At World's End is the worst of this trilogy.
Okay, so let's begin with Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Yes, I know it's Caribbean, but like I said, I feel like that title sounds better with Caribbean. Anyway. So this film is, I think, looking back on it historically, just for when it came out, and I wasn't old enough to have really noticed any of this, but to my understanding, people wrote this off when it was getting marketed, like, what the fuck, Disney's making a movie about a ride, no one's gonna care, it's gonna be a huge bomb, But it actually ended up becoming a giant cultural phenomenon to the point where the Disneyland ride was changed because people didn't like that they didn't see the Pirates of the Caribbean film characters in the ride. So that just goes to tell you how successful it was in that aspect. A film about pirates, like a swashbuckler film in the 2000s, like, really? Could that ever work? But it's like, yeah, I really think that this film does. And so I enjoy this film quite a bit. This film is not a masterpiece. This film is not a classic. I mean, I guess the only way you could... maybe you could argue classic status just for the fact that I think kids are still watching this film for the first time today, and maybe will be for a long time. So I guess you could argue it from that angle. But in terms of, whether the film is an amazing adventure film or not, it isn't. But watching this film again, my opinion did go down of it slightly, in that I would have said it was a great film before, and now I would just say that it's a very strong film now, but it is still very fun, and I really enjoyed watching it. The one thing that this film, I think, does really well, and perhaps the one thing that carries the film, is Jack Sparrow. And I want everybody to take note of that I'm saying that for this film, because I can guarantee you things will change very soon. But in this movie, I think that Jack Sparrow, it is very clear why he's a very well-known character, why people really enjoy him. He's so much fun in this movie, and you just need a character like him in this movie because this film is like, it's very silly and it's very aware of its silliness. This is another important thing that I need to stress for this film. It is very aware of its silliness and does a fantastic job of maintaining that over-the-top, almost cartoonish silliness the whole way through.
And there's a lot of comedic relief, but it's never overplayed. And I want to stress that too before we get to At World's End. Yeah, no, I think hands down, so I do not like the character of Jack Sparrow. I do not like him here. I do not like him anywhere. But he's the most bearable here. But I think, like, by and large, all the performances here are really great. I really like Jeffrey Rush as Barbossa. Mm-hmm. I think that he's such a fun character, especially in this one.
And really hammy too, right? Like
super hammy.
It's another thing that makes this film work so well is that like the villains are super hammy. The character, for the most part, is super hammy. You know, one thing that I think was so interesting about Jack Sparrow in this film that very quickly, and perhaps sours this film because of the sequels, very quickly went awry, was that Jack Sparrow was a character you couldn't pin down. So they really make it clear that Jack Sparrow, he's like, he is the good guy, right? But throughout the film, you never know because he just constantly switches sides, and it seems like he does it for his own benefit. And when he does it for other people's benefit, you don't know if why he's doing it. Which actually is pretty smart on their part because that meant they had a character who they could make the plot twist and turn a lot and you wouldn't question it because it's just Jack Sparrow. It's just what he does. And he's so entertaining in this movie. God, I really, you know, as a character, I actually love him in this film. I love that you can't pin him down. I love the performance. I think he's really funny and really entertaining in this movie. And the reason I'm bringing up Jack Sparrow more than anything else is because the other two leads in this film are incredibly boring. I mean, so boring. It's like if this film didn't have Johnny Depp in it, it'd be a pile of shit. Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann, and this is another important point going into the next film, are so boring. Or, like, literally their entire likability is so cynical because I happen to believe that the studio binged these characters on being likable strictly because the actors who portrayed them are hot. Can we just say that, right? Because that's very clearly what they did, right? Like Orlando Bloom, whatever. Shit, I'm forgetting Elizabeth. Who plays Elizabeth? Do you know her name? I'm forgetting her name.
Keira Knightley.
Keira Knightley, yeah. It is such a cynical business decision, and it is so obvious that is why they casted these actors. And I find it funny that I feel like that backfired, and this is pure speculation, but it seems to me from what I've heard and are familiar with that people ended up having crushes over Johnny Depp, not Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley. So it didn't even work. But I find their characters to just be incredibly boring. Their performances are so by the numbers. Like, not bad, but just, like, not interesting. And Jack holds them together. Like, I don't end up being bored watching these two characters in most scenes because Jack's there, and he's entertaining. And it allows there to be, you know, these two characters can act as, like, the straight man to his comedy routine, which allows them to work a little better in this movie than what we will talk about next. I'll let you comment on that because you didn't immediately jump out and agree. So do you agree with me that these characters and actors are boring as shit, or do you not?
I don't know. I don't really feel that in this one so much. I actually think that they have some interest. I especially like I like Will's you kind of called it out. So they play the straight to Johnny Depp's crazy. And I think Will's character does that especially well a lot of the time. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I can, and that's why that's the one place of praise I gave him. So I can agree with that to some extent.
I would say just in general, pirating, swashbuckling tales like this have a lot of promise. And I think that this one actually, in a lot of ways, captures that promise. Mm-hmm. It becomes fantastical, but in a way that's actually quite interesting and quite fun. I actually had forgotten how many little nods there are to the original attraction.
Yeah, there's like sound snips and...
so seeing those was actually kind of interesting. It got weird at World's End,
Yeah,
but in this one,
I wanted to bring that up.
yeah, we'll get there.
Go ahead.
But in this one, they were fun little nods. You know, there's the classic trying to get the dog who has the key scene, which they play up a little bit, which is fun to see. And then just the main draw of the film, that there's this curse and they're undead and they're trying to find the Aztec gold. It's a fun ride. It's a fun time. And the climax of this movie, the action scene at the end,
we don't have a spoiler tag up, so don't say anything too much, but yeah.
I won't say anything too much. Yeah. Right. It's not like anything necessarily hugely spectacular as when we get to World's End they try to go to, but it's enough interesting character moments and action sequences to where just in general this movie is it's fun to ride along with these characters through this journey.
Yeah, and I want to put up the spoiler tag real quick to talk about some of the ending scenes real quick. One of the cool things I like for the most part, the directing in this film is pretty by the numbers. I'm sure you could agree that the cinematography is kind of generic, the lighting's kind of generic a lot of the time, right? Like, it doesn't really seem like there's much style there for the most part. Would you agree? It's like just kind of...
Yeah,
fine. Which is it's serviceable, right? And there's a little shot you can see behind the poster there that's become really iconic, and it is actually a really clever and great shot. But for the most part, it's just kind of fine. But there was some cool style the director had in this film. So the Black Pearl, this ghost ship, they're all like living dead sort of. And when the moon comes out, you can see them as skeletons. In the final fight scene where they're fighting in this cave under the moonlight, whenever the living dead characters would walk under a little piece of light shining through, they would briefly become a skeleton, which I thought was a really neat little additional visual element to the final fight scene here. Another thing, I just really enjoy the sequence where you realize that Jack Sparrow was on Will Turner's side during this event and ends up shooting Barbossa. I just think that's a really great little scene right there. And I think the climax of this film is deserved. It's fun, and
there are some really great lines coming out of this movie, some really great one-liners. You best start believing in ghost stories, Miss Turner. That's really great.
Yeah.
And that scene in general is just a lot of fun. The score of this series.
Oh, yeah, I should have mentioned that.
And I will say not just this one, but just the series in general is incredible.
Perhaps this one more than other ones, though, because I feel like the music really comes out strongest here. And at World's End, they do some stuff where they kind of like integrate it with new score. It's not as interesting, but like, yeah, you really know the theme to this series is really good and like actually memorable. And yeah, the music's like great. It adds a lot of style to the film. One criticism I do have is the very, very final scene I think is remarkably stupid. Like to the point where I didn't like it. You have, and I just kind of wish it wasn't even there. It's the scene where Jack Sparrow's about to be hanged and Will Turner chucks a sword into the platform underneath where he's going to be hanged so that Jack can stand on the sword so he doesn't die, and then Will Turner fights the executioner, and after all of this shit they go up and like the what do we call them, like are they the East India Trading Company? They are, right? Yeah, they are.
Yeah, they are.
The East India Trading Company is just kind of like, they're like, hey, don't kill Jack. And they're like, oh, you know what? We forgive you, Jack. And then they like smile and they like Jack. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, you were just about to hang the guy. You hated him. And now everyone's just like, everyone's just happy because Will Turner stopped and execute. Like, I just didn't. That was dumb.
So that I was okay with. But doesn't this movie like actually end where he's bringing two girls back to his ship?
No, that's at World's End. That's at World's End.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, no, I don't know. I found that to be very stupid, and not even enjoyably so. So, I mean, it sounds like let's take the spoiler tag down. I'm done discussing that. I think you are too. So it may sound at this point like I think this film is great. I don't. Again, cinematography, directing, pretty average for the most part. I feel like Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann are boring as fuck, and I don't care about them. But there are a lot of great elements here, and that's what makes it such a memorable film. Perhaps not a great film, but definitely a memorable, right? Like, you can agree with that, right? Like, this film's really memorable.
Yeah, and I could see a lot of people really enjoying this film, and I could see a lot of people even saying that this is one of their, I don't know if I'd say favorite films, but one of their top films. You know, it's because it is a fun ride. It's super hammy, but in a really fun way. There are a lot of good characters here. The general story is just fun to follow. But yeah, like I said, in general, I'm not really that big of a fan of this franchise, so I kind of agree. Like, I think it's good.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed going back and watching it. It gave me more appreciation because I just watched the newest one, and that one also is just miserable. Um, but anyway,
Let's go ahead and move on to At Will's End here, because this one might take a little while. I want to speed this up. Holy shit, man! Fuck me! I hate this movie. Oh,
it is just so bad. I want to be clear about this.
Oh!
This film is bloated. It does not know where it's going ever. The plot, there are so many characters that get introduced that don't mean anything.
I know.
Okay, I want to talk before we go into anything. I want to talk quickly about where the beginning of this film unravels for the characters in the story. Yeah. So not unravels from a standpoint of where I think it gets really bad. Okay, so they go to meet this captain in Singapore named Sao Fang. Mm-hmm. He's like the captain of the Chinese pirates, and it's Elizabeth Swann and Barbossa. There's a lot of story within two that honestly really doesn't matter, to be quite honest. Mm-hmm. But just know that Barbossa is back. They're trying to find Will. They don't know where Will is. It turns out Sao Fang has Will. Oh, and they didn't really know that. He pulls Will up and he goes, "Do you know this guy or this person?" And they both go, "Oh no, we don't know him." And so Sao Fang is like, "Okay, well I guess it doesn't matter if I just go to kill him." And Elizabeth Swann gasps. Okay. I don't think that's a non-normal reaction. Yeah. Right? Like, he could do that to literally anyone and she would gasp. Yeah. But no, because she gasped, he's like, "Oh no, you do know him. It's all unraveling now." It's like, no, what? You put a knife to his throat. I don't think she needs to know the person to feel kind of uncomfortable in that moment. It's not like she gasped and she said his name. Yeah. She just gasped. And I just thought that was the stupidest thing.
Okay, I'll briefly mention that if I recall correctly, I think Dead Man's Chest is kind of okay, but I haven't seen it. I didn't watch it before watching this, so I don't know if it holds up. My opinion of the first one went down a tiny bit, so it might have gone down for that too. I really can't say. I remember there's some good visuals in there, though, and some fun action scenes I do remember, so, maybe it's okay, but holy fuck. This movie feels like proto Zack Snyder, doesn't it? It does,
Oh, yeah,
right?
easily.
And it's like, God, it is so goddamn ugly. Oh, I was watching this shit for 3 hours and my eyes were just puking the whole time. Like, it's got that ugly-ass, desaturated, like, needlessly dark look. Even the day scenes are desaturated. And I remember the second film had some really bright and vibrant greens and stuff, right? Like, what even happened? It's like, this is my core problem with this film, possibly above everything else, although it wouldn't make the film as awful as it is if it was just this alone. But this film has this ridiculous sense of self-seriousness about it. Like, and I guess they thought that by desaturating the colors and making the visuals darker, it would enhance the darkness of the story. But God, no, it doesn't. It just makes this film a drag to watch. The film opens with a child getting hanged. This is a Pirates of the Caribbean film, and it opens with a child being hanged. And you're just like, what the fuck? And then... And even the second film, I don't remember having this needless tone. Now, you could argue to me, saying that the film is dark isn't really a criticism, and I think that's fair. But, like, think about what I said made the first film so good, right? Like, the characters were boring. A lot of the things about it weren't really that great. But it didn't take itself seriously, and it was super fun and super hammy and silly. When you take that element out, you take out, like, most of what made that film work, right? And especially because the film still injects comedic relief all the damn time, but now it just feels incredibly out of place. Like, visually, the visuals of the film don't suggest that. The score doesn't suggest that. The story doesn't suggest for that sort of thing. And now you've got like just comic relief characters like these dopey ass pirates from Barbossa's crew and shit. It's just awful. And it doesn't help that the jokes themselves are almost never funny. I maybe chuckled like once in this entire film. It's just like so many poor decisions. And this film makes Elizabeth Swann and Will Turner even more of a focus, and Johnny Depp is not typically there to distract from it. And oh my god, it's just so boring. I just don't care. I just don't care about them. I just don't. And like in this movie, their character's just so weird and all over the place. Like.
And nobody's motivations make any sense.
I know! That's what I was trying to get at.
Like, one moment they're like, no, don't do that thing. The person does that thing, and then the next moment they're like, oh, I guess that was okay.
Yeah. And
like, Will and Elizabeth and Jack are all betraying each other all the time, but in the next scene, they're getting married.
Yeah.
And you're like,
wait,
what?
Oh, I didn't want to get to that. Oh, fuck, that's a spoiler. Who cares? We'll get to that in a second. But like, Jack was the only character who did this in the first film, and by this film, he gets even worse because now, goddamn, everybody's doing it. You even have a scene. I can't say it just yet. Let me just put the spoiler tag up so we can just talk about it. You have a scene where Norrington, who was like the East India Trading Company villain, kind of the first film, you have a scene where even he changes fucking sides before he dies. Like this. Everybody does it, and it's just like it gets so old. This film's plot is so insanely convoluted. It's just like there's so many things going on at once. You've got the Brethren Court shit, which holy fuck. Can I just talk about something I noticed? I didn't even notice before. So there's the Brethren Court scene where the pirates all go to the Brethren Court where they kind of have to like determine what they're going to do with all the other pirate lords who have only just appeared now. And then they all get together on their ships and they're preparing for battle, right? You have this entire battle sequence. It lasts for like 30 fucking minutes. I swear to God, it like actually lasts for about that long, possibly longer. Like the entire last hour of this film is almost entirely this one fucking battle scene. And then at the end, throughout the entire battle scene, you don't see the pirate lords once. You don't see any of their crews once. And then at the end of the scene, everyone starts cheering, and you get shots of all of the pirate lords cheering. And it's the first time you've seen them in like an hour. And it's like, wait, but there were like fucking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of characters, and the film just forgot about them because there was too much shit to do.
And that's a good description of this movie. There is too much shit to do.
Oh.
It's like always something is happening that ends up meaning nothing. I want to talk about this stupid Jack in Davy Jones' locker talking to himself on a pirate ship.
No, I was gonna get to that. I forgot about it. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this is why we talked about there were some references to the original ride in the last film. In this one, everything goes black, and for a while they just play sound clips of the original film. It's very strange.
No, of the ride, yeah.
The original ride. It's very strange, very out of place. And then it's Jack manning the Black Pearl in apparently Davy Jones's locker, and it's him and a whole bunch of others of him. And it's all this like weird, like kind of trying to be abstract comedic relief where they're like killing each other and
eating
then
peanuts.
It's all just a vision and eating peanuts. And
it's so bizarre. I'm all for
and it lasts for so long.
Look,
too.
I'm all for weirdness in movies, right? But that doesn't just mean just being weird on itself is entertaining. Like, holy shit. First of all, visually, this sequence is just awful to watch. Am I wrong? Like, blindingly white the entire time. No other colors.
It's the brightest of this film. It's the only color in this film.
Yeah, but even that's fucking desaturated. Even that looks like Zack Snyder. It's so ugly, and it just like keeps going and going. And look, Jack Sparrow was fun in the first film, okay? But God, he is insanely grating in this movie. And to have scenes of him with other hymns talking to each other has got to be one of the most unpleasant things, right, that you can possibly get. Whew, boy. Yeah, that scene.
And I want to talk about the villains.
Yeah, villains.
I guess. So there's the East India Trading Company guy, who actually I kind of enjoy here.
Really? He doesn't do anything.
Is it Beckett?
Beckett. He doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
He's just a
But he's very hammy. And he's all, and in this one he's always the tries to be the mastermind in a way that I thought was okay. Davy Jones I do not like. Don't, that character is just, it doesn't make any sense. So they have his heart, and if they stab his heart, he gets replaced. So anyone who holds his heart basically controls him. But honestly, no. I mean, first of all, the way that they get the heart back is just the stupidest thing.
Oh, yeah.
Jack Sparrow convinces the two comedic relief characters from the first film to talk to each other.
And he just grabs it when they're looking right at it. What?
They literally... Humans have peripheral vision. It's not like he was invisible. I don't... But then it didn't even matter. Then Davy Jones starts killing everyone anyway. So it's like the whole premise of the thing didn't amount to anything.
Davy Jones acting, like the way he talks is just like, it just feels like the actor was trying to find like a gimmick for his voice, you know? It's not like fun or like unique. He just does this weird thing where he's like, I'm Davy Jones. Ah. Like he says that kind of, it's just like, oh, not with the deep voice, but you know, like that weird, like he keeps saying "ah" at the end of every word. It's just bizarre. He's like just not. And the CG hasn't held up either, but I can't really blame it for that. But that was ugly. The character design is cool, like in concept, I guess.
I thought the concept of his romance with Calypso could have been interesting.
It could have been interesting in a film with less plots, right? Because now it's just yet another fucking thing.
And then they're like, no, we won't release Calypso. And
they do.
Then they do, and no one really cares.
Oh, and that scene fucking sucks, where she grows to and then turns into a bunch of crabs, and she's like, what the fuck? I hate the fucking fight scene in the whirlpool. I loathe it. That is... No, I hate that part more than the fucking Davy Jones locker shit. I'm not even kidding. At least you could say the Davy Jones locker thing was, like, kind of weird in a way that, like, piques your interest. Like, it's not boring. It's just annoying. I guess I don't know which is worse. But, like, the whirlpool scene it's just fucking interminable. And it's not cool. It looks terrible. It's way too fucking dark. You can't see shit. People are like flying around on ropes and shit. Characters and fights are just forgotten about for lengthy periods of time. Characters just
and
start
getting
like
married.
Oh, well, I'll talk about that. Characters just start talking to each other in the midst of the fight, and it's like everybody else who's fighting just disappears for a while so that the characters can talk. But that marriage, oh my god, what an insanely stupid scene. And again, this film just doesn't have the right to be stupid anymore because it's taking itself too seriously in too many ways, right? That's one of the biggest problems is, like, this marriage scene actually probably could have worked in the tone of the original movie. But here, you've got this giant fight scene. It's supposed to be the culmination of all the tension of these three films. And in the midst of it, Elizabeth and Will just get married when it's like, weren't you guys just like fucking betraying each other back and forth this entire film? And he's just like, hey, will you marry me? And she's like, yes, Barbosa, marry us. And then like while they're fighting, they're jumping around and doing the marriage ceremony. And it's like, I couldn't even believe it. I couldn't even believe it. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe I was watching that. It's so stupid.
And it really feels like they did it just to set up more emotional grounding for when Will ultimately gets murdered.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. Because, like, up until that point, they fucking hated each other in this movie.
Or at that point, it didn't even make sense why they were getting married. I thought they hated each other.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
They were, like, stabbing each other in the back, like...
Yeah, like, I feel like we've covered everything. We didn't even mention the Calypso thing. Yeah. There's so much just... And that final fight scene, just so much shit going on. It lasts for so goddamn long.
I think this just goes to show, though, how bloated this film is. Because I don't even think we did cover everything.
Yeah, we didn't. There's so many extra subplots.
There's just so much nonsense. And Elizabeth becomes Pirate Queen after... Pirate King after Sao Fang tries to rape her, but... the thing blows up and he dies, and his last wish is to make her the captain, so she ends up with Jack.
Well, because he thinks she's Calypso, which goes nowhere. He thinks she's Calypso. This film's awful. I really hate it. I mean, like, let me take the spoiler tag down. Let me give it some credit before I give my score, otherwise my score might not make sense. The film is competent. Like, cinematography wise, again, it's just generic. It's definitely worse than the first film, but not terrible. I mean, like, acting is, it's good, right? Like, everybody portrays the roles the same they did in the first film, I'd say. In fact, I would even maybe say that Elizabeth Swann, Keira Knightley, right? She's actually better in this film than she was in the first one. Like, if there's one thing that this film does better, I would argue that. So there are things about this film that I think are competent. I don't think the film is, like, on a technical level, really all that bad. Besides the, I mentioned the fucking color desaturation, which is just a terrible stylistic choice more than anything. But on every other technical level, it's fine. So there's that, I suppose. I can't. Anyway, that's all we should say about this film. Let's go ahead and give our final thoughts, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll go first. Curse of the Black Pearl, I will give a 7. No, 7.5. 7.5. I'll give it that. I think it's a really entertaining film. I really enjoy it. My score might suggest that I wouldn't really want to rewatch it much, but I would rewatch this film totally. Absolutely. It's a blast. I just don't think it's like a great film. I think I have a lot of problems with it. But yeah, no, it's very entertaining. And perhaps on another viewing, I could reconvince myself that it's great. I really could see myself feeling that way because I really liked it. It just, I think, we'll turn Elizabeth Swann boring, all that kind of stuff. At World's End, I will give a 3. Same score as everything now, so good job, I guess. The only reason I'm not going lower is, again, for the reasons I said. I think the film's too competently made to go lower, but fuck me. It is the kind of movie. It's almost 3 hours long. Like, I think it's like 2 hours and 56 minutes or some shit. Like, are you kidding me? And like everything about it, like story-wise, plot-wise, and writing is just terrible. It is just, this film's like unwatchable for me because it's so boring and long, and it's just like, fuck, man. And especially because if you really want to watch this film, you basically have to watch Dead Man's Chest as well, right? Which is another shitty thing, because even though I remember enjoying Dead Man's Chest moderately, which again, maybe I would go down, I can't think it'd be below a 5 out of 10 though for me. Because again, there's stuff in there I actually think's pretty good. But it does have problems that this film also has. But it's like, if you watch that film, you have to watch At World's End. And that pisses me off, because this movie is awful. There is nothing good to glean from. There's like no great scenes or anything to glean from this. At least Dead Man's Chest has like that wheel fight, which is super fun. This has nothing like that. This film is dour, and when it's not dour, it's annoying. God, I hate it. I hate it. And so if I have to say what happened to Pirates of the Caribbean, it took itself too seriously. That's what happened. Like, I haven't seen the two films. I mean, I have seen On Stranger Tides when it came out, but I remember nothing about it. But I haven't seen the newest film. They might be worse. I have no idea. And I would ask you, Steven, do those films continue in the trend of taking themselves too seriously, or are they bad for other reasons?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
I would say that they take themselves even more seriously than this one tried to.
Oh, Lord.
And that's saying something.
Yeah, because this film like tries to be this like an epic on par with the Odyssey, with how many fucking plot threads and shit. And it's like, that is not what this series should be. And
I mean, hell, even Calypso's in it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Clearly, my theory is correct. They tried to be the Odyssey. All right, that's what happened.
Take that, Homer.
Okay.
We have Pirates at World's End. So I would give the first Pirates film probably around the same, but I'd probably go a little lower. I'd give it about a 7. I do think it's an enjoyable ride. Going back to it was actually really fun. I'd probably go back to it again in another couple of years or so. I think it's just a fun little film. I think the score is incredible. We talked about that. Mm-hmm. Generally, I like the plot more than anything. I don't like Jack Sparrow, but Jack Sparrow is not the biggest part of that film, whereas I feel like the problem with this series is they only make Jack Sparrow to be an even larger part of all of these stories. He becomes this god among pirates for some reason that I still do not comprehend.
Yeah, because he was like incompetent in the film. Like, no one took him seriously.
Incompetent.
Like, it's... Yeah.
I mean, look, even what you have here, the poster for At World's End, he's the only one on it. But anyway, and then At World's End, I would give probably about the same, a 3. As you mentioned, I mean, you know, they sure did film it. I think at the time it was the most expensive film ever made, so that's saying something.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah.
I'm looking that up.
And I think that, you know, individually there are some plot threads that could have been interesting, but this thing is just so bloated and just tries to introduce so many things. It almost doesn't even make sense because they're wrapping up this, what they turn into a trilogy, but introduce more into this film and have to tie up those loose ends within the same film. It's just mind-boggling. And a lot of the action scenes are just hard to even look at. It's hard to even follow them because you mentioned it, the saturation issues. Also, a lot of them take place in like the rain or some sort of a storm, which makes sense so they can cover up some of the lesser CGI at the time. But even still, it's like, it's not fun to watch and it's not fun to follow.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. And I want to point out, I just looked this up and I had no idea about this. I'm actually shocked. I seriously had no idea. So At World's End was the most expensive film when it was released. It is the third most expensive film now. And the most expensive film ever made adjusted for inflation is Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides.
Oh yeah, I remember that one was really expensive too.
I had no idea. That is bizarre. I had no fucking clue. That's crazy to me. That's crazy. Wow. So they sunk a lot of money into this piece of shit.
Oh, really quickly, actually, I forgot something that we missed that I wanted to talk about. Can you put the spoiler tag up for 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, everyone. This is we're kind of playing it by ear. So I want to talk about the primary climax of this film. So, for whatever reason, there's so much we could talk about, but basically, Will becomes the helm of the Dutchman, and Keira Knightley's character and Johnny Depp's character, Jack and Elizabeth Swann, are on the Black Pearl. They go on either side of Bennett's War Machine pirate ship.
Oh, I wanted to bring this up too. Oh, thank you. Okay, keep going.
And actually, it is kind of a cool scene as both of the ships on either side of the big war machine that's supposed to destroy everything are blowing it up.
Yeah.
And it gets a little cheesy. He's like walking. They're asking him, "What do we do, sir? What do we do?" And he's frozen in this moment. And they all abandon ship, and he's just walking as there's debris flying all around him, which is kind of silly, but also kind of fun. Here's the thing, though. They had a giant armada behind them that did nothing.
Yeah, and they just... What?
And then they just turn around and run away.
And it's like the old... They're running... Okay, so the implication is they're running away because they see how powerful the pirate ships are. It's like, no, you fucking tools. They were only powerful because there was 2 of them and 1 of the war machine ship.
Yeah, they still easily... in every way outnumbered the amount of pirate ships that there were.
Well, and here's my question. Why did they decide to just bring the 1 ship out anyway? Like, even if it has cannons on both sides and could demolish anything, would it not at least help to have all of the fucking hundreds of ships come with you? And okay, beyond all of that, I agree, the shot itself is kind of neat. The concept is kind of neat. But it makes absolutely no fucking sense to me that Beckett can't give instructions in this part. Because what they're going for is like, and this is what I wanted to bring up, what they're going for is like, you know, he's caught off guard and they surprised him. I get that just fine, but would you not at least tell your crew to fire? Like, why didn't he just say to fire? I don't even get it. Is the only reason he didn't say to fire so that we could have a shot where they're getting annihilated and doing nothing back? Because it makes no sense.
I mean, you would imagine with a machine this well-oiled that if something like this were to happen, if the captain were to freeze, you would imagine the first mate would then be able to give the call to fire.
Or people would just start doing it just out of instinct at a certain point.
Because they make it a point to show how many cannons come out of this war machine and are ready and do nothing. They never do a thing.
And you could still have them get destroyed even if they fight back. Like, there's really no reason for it. I just don't get it. Oh, God, okay. Yeah, I'm glad we brought that up because I forgot about that. But that's all I wanted to say about this. So, yeah, there you go. Pirates of the Caribbean and Arcade Fire both turned to shit. I think that's the theme of the episode. And I think we should move on to the recommendations. Do you?
Yep, as our podcast now turns to shit.
Okay, what happened to Get Recc'd? So, Steven, I'm going to recommend to you a video game. And the video game is called What Remains of Edith Finch. This game is a walking simulator game. You familiar with those?
Yes.
Okay. It's a walking simulator game by the studio that... Are you familiar with the game The Unfinished Swan?
Yes.
Okay. It's the same studio that made that game. And, yeah, that's it. Okay. Steven, what do you got for me?
Lewis, I'm going to recommend to you a video game.
Oh, shit. It's happening again.
Lewis, I'm going to recommend to you the video game Cuphead. Cuphead is actually a fairly recent game. I want to say it came out in 17, and it was in development forever. But Cuphead is a run-and-gun platformer. You play as the title character Cuphead. You can also play co-op, and then the other person plays as Mugman. I won't give away too much right now, but yeah, that's my recommendation.
Sweet. So it kind of looks like the previous episode, we have a bit of an accidental theme going on here. I mean, we wouldn't really call it a theme, but, you know, that's interesting, I guess.
But I just want to be clear, unless we specifically call out a theme, any of these unintentional themes are completely unplanned. So Lewis and I are recommending something to each other every week, and sometimes it just so happens that we recommend something from the same category.
Yeah. It's good that you brought that up, because for any first-time records, as we call them, the records.
The records.
Yeah, that's what Steven came up with. I don't want to take credit for that. Any first-time records may need to understand that point. So yeah, do we have anything we want to say to the audience? Because I don't think I do.
No, I think we were just talking about before this one started. We might look to host this podcast on additional places across the internet. We still plan to do them live here, but we may put the recording up in other places where podcasts are sold. So that way those who may want to listen to them just as audio only may be able to do so. So stay tuned for that. Probably have more information on that one come next episode. And we'll talk about what that might look like, and then whether we might try to put our backlog up on there or not.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's it. So those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.